I was 16 the summer the quiet ones came to Hallenbeck, and I was the only one in our settlement who knew what they were. I am an old man now. My hands shake when I lift a cup, and the doctor at the veteran's house tells me my heart will give out before my mind does, which is a small mercy he thinks I should be grateful for. I tell him I am grateful. I tell him a lot of things to make him leave the room. What I have not told him, what I have not told anyone in 60 years, is that the war did not start on the day the cruisers burned over Cygnus Reach. It started in our front garden, on a Tuesday in late summer, when my mother walked out to hang washing and came back inside smiling in a way that did not belong on her face. I want to set it down now, not because anyone will read it, and not because I think the record matters anymore. The record is fine. The histories have their dates and their generals and their orbital tonnage, and they are mostly right about the broad shape of things. But the histories do not know what it felt like to be 16 years old on a small colony at the edge of a long supply line, with the sun coming up the wrong color and your own mother looking at you like a house guest she was being polite to. The histories do not know about Jens, so I will set it down for him, and then I will close the book. Hallenbeck was not anywhere. That is the simplest way to put it. We were the third settlement on Cygnus IV, a low-pressure agricultural shelf strung along a river the survey teams had named the Lasso because they had run out of better ideas. We grew protein lichen in long flat trays under polymer skis, and we shipped it out twice a year on a hauler that came down on a column of dirty fire and left the same week. There were 211 of us when I was 16. 212, if you counted the swimming pool attendant's dog, which everyone did. The pool itself was the only public structure in Hallenbeck that had not been built for work. It sat in the middle of the settlement under a domed transparent roof, and on summer afternoons the whole place smelled of warm chlorine and the chemical orange of the snack stand, and the older men sat in folding chairs along the rim and watched the children paddle, and that was our luxury. That was the whole of it. A pool with a yellow plastic slide, a snack stand that sold 3 things, and a man named Bademeister Otto who slept in a chair by the door because he could not stand his wife's brother, who was visiting from the inner colonies for 6 months and would not leave. I tell you about the pool because the pool is where I first saw Jens, and because the pool is where everything ends, in a way that I will get to. But first I have to tell you about my mother in the front garden, and about the supermarket, and about Charlotte who was my friend until she wasn't. My mother's name was Ng. She was a small woman with strong forearms from 20 years of lichen work, and a habit of singing under her breath in a language she had grown up with and never taught me. My father, Aldi's, was a long-haul mechanic who came home for 2 weeks every season and slept most of the first 3 days. They were not happy people in the way the films from the inner systems made happy look. They were stitched together, like 2 pieces of the same coat. They argued without raising their voices, and they sat close on the porch at night, and they shared a cigarette they were both supposed to have quit. That was how I knew them. That was the shape of my mother for 16 years. The morning everything changed was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday was the day my father was due home and my mother had washed his shirts. She went out to hang them on the line by the side of the prefab, and I watched her from the kitchen window because I was waiting for the kettle to boil and I had nothing better to do. She bent. She straightened. She bent again. Halfway through the 3rd shirt she stopped, very still, with one of my father's blue work shirts held up against the daylight. She did not move for what I now think was probably 8 or 9 seconds, though at the time it felt much longer. Then she finished hanging the shirt, picked up the empty basket, and came back inside. I said, "Mum." She smiled at me. It was a wide, soft, courteous smile, and it stayed on her face for too long, and her eyes did not move when her mouth moved. She said, "Yes, Paul." I had been about to ask her something about my father's arrival, about whether she wanted me to walk down to the landing field to meet him. The words went away. I stood at the counter, and the kettle began to scream, and my mother kept smiling at me with my mother's face, and I knew with a clarity that has never since left me that the woman in front of me was not my mother. I cannot explain to you, even now, how I knew. I have tried over the years to put it into words for myself. The closest I have come is this. It was as if someone had built a perfect copy of my mother out of warm clay, and the clay had every detail right, every crease at the corner of her eye and every chip on her front tooth from when she had fallen against the porch rail in my 8th year, but the clay had no inside. There was nothing behind the eyes. There was a thing wearing her, and it was pleased to be wearing her, and that was the worst part. It was at ease in her skin. I poured the tea. I poured 2 cups, one for her and one for me. My hands did not shake. I have thought about that often. At 16, with the world turning over under my feet, my hands did not shake, and I have never since done anything as brave as pour those 2 cups of tea and sit down at the table and ask the thing wearing my mother how she had slept. She told me she had slept very well. She told me she felt better than she had in years. She drank her tea slowly, with both hands cupped around the mug the way my mother had never done, because my mother had always held a mug by the handle with one hand and gestured with the other. The clay did not know that. The clay had her face but not her hands. I finished the tea. I said I was going to walk into town. She told me to enjoy myself and to be careful crossing the Loader yard. She did not ask when I would be back. My mother had asked, every single time I left the house for 16 years when I would be back. The clay did not know that either. I walked to town. The streets were the same streets they had always been, the low prefabs with their patched solar skins, the Loader yard, the chapel that the colony used as a town hall on civic days, and as a chapel on the 2 religious holidays nobody really observed anymore. I passed the tellerman's place and old man Tellerman waved at me from his porch, and I waved back, and his wave was wrong. It was the same gesture. The arm went up at the right angle, but there was nothing inside it. He was smiling at me with the same wide, courteous smile my mother had worn. I walked faster. The supermarket was in the long shed at the south end of the main row, sharing a wall with the parts depot. It was not really a supermarket. It was 4 aisles of dry goods and a chiller cabinet for the protein from the rendering plant. The owner, a woman named Frau Geist who had come out to Cygnus from one of the orbital habitats and never forgiven the planet for being a planet, ran the place from a stool by the door and watched her customers the way a hawk watches a yard. I went in for nothing in particular. I wanted to be among people, and I wanted to see whether they had all been replaced or only some of them, and I needed an excuse to look closely at faces. I picked up a tin of fish I had no intention of buying and I walked the aisles. Frau Geist was wrong. The man stacking lichen biscuits was wrong. The 2 women by the freezer, comparing prices and laughing softly, were wrong. They were all of them clay. The settlement I had grown up in was a settlement of clay people now, and I was alone among them, and I felt the cold rise up my back and settle in the base of my skull and stay there. I was at the end of the 3rd aisle when I saw the boy. He was older than me, 18 or 19, taller than me, wearing a thermal jacket 2 sizes too big with the sleeves rolled up over thin forearms. He had dark hair that had not been cut in some time and a face that had not been arranged in some time either. He was standing very still by the chiller cabinet and he was, very carefully, taking a packet of dried sausage and sliding it inside his jacket. I watched him do it. He looked up and our eyes met across the aisle, and his face did not arrange itself into a smile. It did not arrange itself into anything. He looked at me the way a tired man looks at a wall, with no pretense at all, and I understood in that moment that he was the first real person I had seen all morning. He walked past me without a word. I followed him out of the supermarket. Frau Geist did not notice. The clay was not built to watch for thieves. The clay was built to be pleasant. He cleared the Loader yard at a steady pace, the packet of sausage rigid under his jacket, and I came after him at a distance because I did not know yet how to speak to him, and I did not know what I would say if I did. He went past the chapel, past the parts depot, past the line of Skinner sheds where they processed the lichen mash. He went all the way out to the western edge of the settlement, where the road thinned to a track and the track went down to the riverbank. He sat down on a flat rock by the water and he opened the sausage with his teeth and he ate it without expression, slowly, the way an animal eats. I sat down on a rock about 6 meters from him. He did not look at me. After a while he said, without turning, "What?" I said, "Are you new?" He said, "I have been here 3 months. You are the one who is new to noticing." I said, "What is your name?" He chewed. He said, "Jens." I said, "I am Paul." He said, "I know. You live in the green prefab by the chapel. Your father is a hauler mechanic. Your mother sings to herself in the front garden." I said, "My mother does not sing anymore." He looked at me then. It was the first time he properly looked at me, and his eyes were gray and very tired, and there was something behind them that the clay people did not have. He said, "When did it happen?" I said, "This morning. I think this morning, I do not know." He said, "It has been happening for 19 days. Yours is late. Most of them went in the first 10. You and I are not many." I sat very still on my rock by the river. The water moved past us in its slow brown way, and a wadding bird picked at the mud on the far bank, and the world looked exactly as it had looked the day before. And Jens told me, in the flat, tired voice of a person who had stopped being surprised by anything, that the colony was gone. He had come to Hallenbeck 3 months earlier on a passenger berth from the inner orbits, sent to live with an uncle who ran one of the Skinner sheds. His parents had died 8 months before that in a transport collision over the belt, a routine freight skip that had ended in a fuel line failure, and a slow tumbling burn that the recovery crews had photographed at length, because it had been an unusually clean break, and they were proud of the recovery. Jens had been 17 at the time. He had been raised on inter-system schools where they still taught the old histories, the ones from before the colonies, the ones that had pictures of soldiers in the wet trenches of a place called France, and pictures of camp huts, and pictures of the great evacuation fleets at the close of the Salient's War. He had grown up looking at those pictures. He had told his teachers, when he was 11, that what he wanted to do when he was old was to keep records. He had wanted to be the one who wrote things down so that they would not be forgotten. That is what he told me on the rock by the river the first day I knew him. I am writing this now because of him. I want that on the record. He is the reason there is a record. He had noticed the change on the 7th day. His uncle had come back from a long shift at the Skinner shed and had sat down to dinner and had eaten with the wrong hand. That was all. The wrong hand. His uncle had been left-handed every day of his life, and that night he had picked up the fork with his right, and from there Jens had begun to watch, and he had begun to see, and within 4 days he had understood that the man in his uncle's house was not his uncle. He had not slept under his uncle's roof since. He had been living in the abandoned filter shack down by the river and stealing food where he could and waiting, he said, for someone else in the settlement to wake up. I said, "What are they?" He said, "I have a theory. It is only a theory. I have not seen one of the things outside a human skin, and I do not want to. But I have read everything in the library at the chapel, which is not much, and I have read the manifests of the haulers, which is more, and I have spoken to one of the technicians at the comm relay before they took her, and I think I know enough to guess." He guessed it for me there on the rock, with the river going past and the wadding bird picking at the mud. He guessed that something had come down with one of the shipments from the inner orbits, that something had been seated in a cargo container, and had crossed the loader yard on a pallet of agricultural enzymes, and had begun its work in the rendering plant where the warmth was constant and the moisture was high. He guessed that it was a parasite of a kind we had not seen before, that it found a host, and it rewrote the host from the inside out, that it did this slowly over the course of a day or two, hollowing the person and refilling them with something that was not them. He guessed that the new occupant was not malicious. That was the part he kept coming back to. The thing inside our neighbors was not cruel. It did not want to hurt us. It only wanted to be us, and it wanted everyone to be it, and it had no concept of why anyone would object. That was the alien part. Not teeth, not claws, not the screaming horrors from the old films. The alien part was the placidity. The alien part was that they were happy, and they wanted you to be happy too, and they could not understand why you would refuse. I sat on the rock for a long time after he stopped talking. The sun moved on the water. He finished the sausage and he tucked the wrapper into his pocket because even now, even with the settlement gone, he was the kind of person who did not leave wrappers on the riverbank. I have thought about that small thing 1,000 times. The wrapper in the pocket. That was Jen's. Eventually I said, Charlotte. He said, who is Charlotte? I said, my friend, we have been friends since we were 6. I have to see her, I have to know. He did not argue. He said only, be careful. If she is gone, do not let her see that you have noticed. They are not violent yet. They will be when they understand we are still here. Right now they are still pretending to be the people they replaced. That is our window. I went back into the settlement that afternoon. I walked to Charlotte's house. Her mother answered the door with the wide, soft smile that I now recognized and would recognize on 1,000 faces in 1,000 corridors for the rest of my life. She asked if I would like to come in. She offered me tea. I said I had only come to see Charlotte. She called Charlotte down. Charlotte came down the stairs and she was wrong. She was wrong in the way her hand rested on the banister, and she was wrong in the way she said my name. She said, Paul, I am so glad you came. I have been thinking about you. Charlotte had never said anything like that to me in 10 years of friendship. Charlotte and I had a friendship that ran on insults and on long silences, and on the deep unspoken trust between 2 children who had grown up at the edge of nowhere and had no one else. Charlotte did not tell me she had been thinking about me. Charlotte would have rolled her eyes at the very idea. I said, I cannot stay. I came to tell you my father is back tomorrow, and I will be at his welcome dinner, so we will see each other at the pool the day after. She smiled. She said I would like that. I left. I walked home. My mother was in the kitchen, and she had cooked, and the kitchen smelled of stewed lichen, and of the cinnamon she always added even though my father said it ruined the dish. She had cooked the meal exactly the way she always cooked it. The thing inside her had access to her memories. That was the discovery that has stayed with me longest. They were not strangers wearing our faces. They were the people themselves, hollowed out and refilled, with all the recipes intact and all the small habits and all the affections, but with something else now sitting in the chair where the soul used to sit. When she put her hand on my shoulder and asked me how my day had been, the hand was the right weight and the right temperature, and the smile was the smile she had smiled at me every day of my life. And I had to remind myself, with the whole force of my will, that the person who had smiled at me every day of my life was no longer in the room. I ate the stew. I told her about my walk. I told her I had seen Charlotte. I went to bed and I lay on my back and I waited until the prefab was quiet, and then I climbed out of the window and I walked in my socks down to the filter shack by the river, where Jens was waiting because he had said he would wait. He had built a small fire in a tin, and he had a thin blanket around his shoulders, and he looked, for the first time, like a boy and not like a tired animal. He said, how long do we have? I said, I think they think I am one of them. I think they will keep thinking it until I make a mistake, maybe a few days. He said, then we have a few days. After that we go. I said, go where? He said, there is a comm relay at the old weather station up on the southern ridge. It has not been used in 8 years. If I can get to it and bring it up, I can punch a signal to the hauler that comes through in 14 days. The hauler captain will not believe me, but the hauler captain will report it, and the report will go up the chain, and somebody in the inner orbits will read it and somebody will be afraid. That is what we have to do. We have to be afraid in the right ear. I said 14 days. He said 14 days. We have to stay alive and we have to stay ourselves. If they get either of us, we are not coming back from it. There is no cure for it that I have heard of. There is no version of this where the people we knew come back. They are gone, Paul. The first day you understood that was today. You will go on understanding it for the rest of your life. I cried. I did not want to cry in front of him, and I did. He did not say anything about it. He poked at the fire in the tin and he waited for me to be finished, and then he said, "Tomorrow you go to the pool, you behave normally. You laugh at the right times. You eat what your mother cooks. The day after tomorrow we take the loader van from the depot and we go up the ridge." I said, "Why the day after tomorrow?" He said, "Because your father comes home tomorrow, and you have to look at him before we go." I have thought about that line many times in the years since. He did not have to say it. He could have insisted we go that night. The relay was 8 hours drive up a rough track, and every day that passed was a day in which the clay might learn what I was. But he had lost his parents, and he understood. He gave me my father. My father came home on a Wednesday. The hauler set down at the landing field at midday, and the families went out in their good clothes and stood at the rope line. And I stood between my mother and an old woman named Frau Beckert, who had baked since I was small, and we waited. The hauler that day was the Margaret, a long, ugly thing with patched plating and a registry number rubbed half off by atmosphere burn, and it came in slow and crooked, and set down on its stabilizers with the long, dry hiss they always made. The heat off the hull pushed across the field at us in a hard, dry wave that smelled of scorched rust and propellant, and the children at the rope line clapped, because the children always clapped, and the mothers held back the smaller ones who wanted to run forward, because the deck plates stayed hot for an hour after a set-down, and there had been a burn 3 years before that everyone in Hallenbeck still remembered. The crew came down the ramp in their work coveralls with their kit bags over their shoulders, and my father was the 4th man off, with his duffel over his shoulder, and his face creased the way it always was when he had been awake too long. He saw me. He grinned. He came across the field, and he caught me up under the arms the way he had caught me up under the arms when I was 8 and not since, and he held me to him for a long second, and I felt the rough wool of his coat against my cheek, and I smelled the engine grease that was always in his skin, and he was him. He was him. He had not been here when they came. He was still my father. He set me down. He turned to my mother. He kissed her on the mouth, and his hand went to the small of her back, and he closed his eyes, and I watched him, and I watched her, and I saw the exact moment her hand moved to his neck and rested there, and I saw the exact moment my father's eyes opened, and I saw the exact moment my father understood. He did not pull away. He did not stiffen. He looked over her shoulder at me, and his eyes were my father's eyes, and they had read everything in a single instant, and he gave me, without moving, the smallest possible shake of his head. Do not show it. Do not let her know. He held the kiss a beat longer. He laughed at something she said. He put his arm around her shoulders, and he turned to the crowd, and he raised his other hand to Frau Beckert, and we walked off the landing field as a family, and my father, who had been home for 90 seconds, was already pretending. He had understood it faster than I had. He had understood it from a kiss. That night he made me come out to the porch with him on the excuse of fetching kindling. He held me by the shoulders, and he looked at me in the dark, and he spoke very low and very fast. He said, "How long, Paul?" I told him. He said, "How many?" I told him I thought all of them. I told him about Jens. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I had finished, he said, "You go with the boy. You go tomorrow. Do not come back here. Do not look for me. I will buy you what time I can." I said, "Come with us." He said, "I cannot. She will know if I am missing. If she knows, she tells the rest, and they come for you on the road. I have to be here, and I have to be ordinary, and I have to let her think I am also her now. I can do it for 2 days, maybe 3. After that she will see through me. By then you will be at the ridge." I said, "Father." He said, "Paul, you listen to me. You do not stop, and you do not come back. You write down everything the boy told you, and you keep the paper on you. If they take the relay, you go on foot to the next settlement, and if the next settlement is gone, you go on to the one after that. Somebody is alive somewhere. You find them. You tell them what is here. That is the only thing you owe me. You tell them." I told him I would. He held my face in both his hands. They were the hands of a hauler mechanic, cracked and oil-stained and very warm. He said, "I am proud of you. I have been proud of you every day. I should have said it more." Then he let me go and he went inside and he sat down at the table next to the thing wearing my mother, and he ate the meal she had prepared for him, and he laughed at the right places, and he did not look at me again that night. The next morning, Thursday, I went to the pool. I had to. Jens had been right about that part too. If I changed my routine, they would notice. So I packed my towel and I walked the 4 blocks to the dome and I paid my coin to Otto, who smiled at me from his chair by the door because Otto had been one of the first to go and had been smiling for 19 days, and I went through into the heat and the chemical orange smell and the splash of children. Charlotte was already there. She was sitting on the edge with her feet in the water, and she waved at me with the bright wide wave that had not been hers a week ago. I waved back. I dropped my towel on the bench and I slid into the water at the shallow end, and I let the warmth come up over my ribs and I floated on my back and I looked up at the polymer dome and at the smudged sun beyond it, and I thought, this is the last hour of my childhood, and I let myself have it. Charlotte swam over. She was a strong swimmer. She had always been a stronger swimmer than I was. She came up beside me and she trod water and she said, "You are very quiet today, Paul." I said, "I am tired. My father is back." She said, "I am glad your father is back. I missed your father." Charlotte had never spoken to my father in her life. The clay was getting confident. The clay was making mistakes now because it thought it did not have to be careful with me anymore. I said, "Charlotte, do you remember the time we put the lichen meal in old man Tellerman's letterbox?" She smiled. She said, "Yes, that was funny." We had never done that. I had made it up. There was nothing in her face that knew she had been caught. There was only the smile and the warm water and the splash of children. I went under for a few seconds and I came back up and I told her I had to go and meet my father, and I climbed out and I dried off and I walked past Otto, who told me to come again soon, and I went home, and I did not look back at the pool, because if I had looked back I would not have been able to leave it. Jens was waiting at the filter shack at midnight. He had with him a small canvas bag, his thermal jacket, a coil of insulated wire he had taken from one of the Skinner sheds, and a sidearm. I looked at the sidearm and I did not ask. He said, "It was my uncle's. He kept it in a tin under the bed. He never told my aunt about it. He told me, the first week I came, because he said every man on a colony should know where there was a gun in case the dogs went bad. He showed me how to clean it. I have 11 rounds. I said, "Do you know how to shoot it?" He said, "I know how to point it. That will have to do." We went to the depot. The depot was on the north edge of the settlement. 4 loader vans and a fuel cell rig and a shed where the mechanics kept their tools. My father's shed. There was a man asleep in a chair by the door. We did not look at him. Jens had a key for the loader van, and I did not ask where he had got it. We rolled the van out of the depot in neutral, on the slight slope, and we did not start the engine until we were 300 meters clear, and we drove west out of Hallenbeck with no headlights, with only the starlight off the prefab roofs and the thin band of the orbital habitats overhead. The track up the ridge was rough. The van bucked and crashed over the ruts in the headlights when we finally dared turn them on, picked out the silver eyes of small animals in the scrub. Jens drove. I sat with my hands flat on my thighs and I tried not to think about my father at the table, eating the meal the clay had cooked, smiling for her, dying inside his own skin so that I could leave. I tried not to think about Charlotte at the pool. I tried not to think about the kitchen window and the laundry line and the blue work shirt. I thought about them anyway. You cannot not think about a thing by trying. That is one of the lessons that summer taught me. We drove for 6 hours. The track climbed and turned and climbed again. The sun came up behind us and the river fell away into a thin silver thread on the plain below, and the air thinned and got colder. Jens spoke very little. Once around dawn he said, "If I do not make it to the relay, you make it to the relay. Do you understand me? You leave me where I fall and you go on." I told him I understood. I do not know whether I would have done it. I was 16 and I had already lost everyone I had ever loved in the space of one day, and I do not know what I would have done if Jens had fallen. I have thought about it for 60 years, and I still do not know. The weather station was a low concrete dome with a collapsed dish on its roof and a door that had not been opened in 8 years. Jens forced the door with a pry bar from the van. The inside smelled of dust and rodent. The relay panel was on the back wall, dark, with a thick layer of dust on its glass. He sat down in front of it and he opened a side panel and he began to work. He had read manuals. He had read everything in the chapel library and everything in the depot records, and he had taught himself, in the filter shack by the river, on the strength of 19 days of solitary terror, how to bring up a dead comm relay. He worked for 4 hours. I sat by the door with the sidearm in my lap because he had given it to me to hold while he worked, and I watched the track below us, and I watched the plane, and I watched, with a slowly tightening feeling in my chest, the small column of dust that appeared on the track about 2 hours after sunrise and that came on, steady and unhurried, towards the ridge. I said, Jens. He said, I know. I saw it 10 minutes ago. I have another hour, maybe more, hold the door. The column was a single loader van. It was coming on at a steady 40 kilometers an hour, which was the speed at which the clay drove because the clay was not in a hurry. The clay was never in a hurry. They came on like that for the last hour. They came on with their pleasant smiles and their warm, soft eyes and their certainty that we would be made to see reason. And I sat by the door of the concrete dome with 11 rounds in a sidearm I had not been trained to fire, and I watched them get closer, and I felt the cold that had settled at the base of my skull on Tuesday morning settle further down, into my spine, into my legs, into the floor under my feet. The van stopped at the foot of the slope. 4 figures got out. They walked up the track in the unhurried way I had now come to know, and at the front, in his blue work shirt and his oil-stained jacket, was my father. I cannot tell you what that was like. I will not try. He came up the slope alone. The other 3 waited at the van. He stopped about 10 meters from the door of the dome, and he raised his hands, palms out, and he smiled at me. And the smile was wide and soft and courteous, and his eyes did not move with his mouth. And I knew, of course I knew, I had known the moment the column of dust appeared, but seeing it on him was different from knowing it. He had lasted less than a day. He had not bought us 3 days or even 2. He had bought us 6 hours, and he had bought them with himself. And now he was standing at the foot of the track with the wrong smile and his hands raised, and he was saying my name in a voice that was almost his voice. He said, Paul, come down, come back with me. You do not have to be afraid of this. It is better on the other side. Your mother is happy, I am happy. You will be happy. Come down to the van. Bring the boy, and come down. I lifted the sidearm. Jens behind me did not look up from the panel. He said very quietly, can you do it? I said, I do not know. He said, it does not have to be him. You can shoot one of the others. The others were never anyone you knew. You shoot one of the others and the rest will scatter for cover because the thing inside them is not brave, and we will get the time we need. I aimed at the second figure at the van. He was a man I had not known well, a skinner from one of the southern sheds, a man who had once given me a piece of hard candy at the chapel fair when I was 8 because I had been crying about something I no longer remembered. The candy had been orange. I aimed at the middle of his chest and I squeezed, and the sidearm bucked in my hands, and the man at the van fell down without a sound, and the other 2 ran, exactly as Jens had said they would, and they ran with the unhurried gait of the clay even while running, because the clay did not know how to be afraid in its body. My father did not run. My father stood in the track and he watched the man fall, and he looked back up at me, and the wide, soft smile did not change. He said, Paul, come down. I sat down. I sat down right there in the doorway of the concrete dome with the sidearm in my lap, and I did not look at him anymore. I looked at my own hands. Jens behind me said, 2 minutes. He worked. The panel lit. He typed. He sent. He sent again. He sat back. He said, it is gone. It is in the network. The hauler will pick it up on the next pass. It is gone, Paul. My father on the track said, "Paul, come down, please." He had never said please to me. My father had not been a man for please. He had been a man for hard arms and rough kindness, and the cigarette on the porch and the second piece of bread without asking. He had not been a man for please. The clay did not know that. The clay had access to his memories, but it did not know him, and the difference between knowing him and being him was right there at the foot of the slope, in a word he would not have used. I stood up. I walked out of the doorway and down the slope towards him. Jens said my name sharp behind me. I did not turn. I went down the track until I was 3 meters from my father, and I stopped and I looked at his face and I said, "He is not in there, is he?" He smiled at me. He said, "He is at peace. He is one of us now. You will be one of us now. Come." I raised the sidearm, and I shot him in the heart. He fell the way my father would have fallen. He went down in a heap with his blue work shirt opening at the chest and his hands going slack, and the thing inside him made a small sound that was not quite a sound, more like a pressure change in the air, and then it stopped, and the body that had been my father lay in the dust of the track, and I stood over it with the sidearm hanging at my side. And Jens came down the slope behind me very quickly, and he took the sidearm out of my hand, and he put his arm around my shoulders, and he turned me around and he walked me back up to the dome, and I did not look back at the track, and I have not looked back at the track in 60 years. We drove down the other side of the ridge. The relay was sent. The hauler picked it up 4 days later. The captain reported it on a hunch because Jens had been clever enough to encode it in a freight clearance protocol that automatically triggered a flag at the orbital station. The fleet came in 11 days after that. They came in hard. The histories will tell you the rest of it. They will tell you about the cordons and the burnback operations, and the long, ugly business of cleaning out the ceded settlements one by one, and they will tell you about the cruisers over Cygnus Reach, and they will tell you about the eventual roll-up of the Skein, which is the name they gave the Parasite once they had a specimen to study. The Skein is what the records call them. The quiet ones is what I have always called them in my own head, because quiet was the word for what they made of us. I want to tell you about Jens. We were 3 weeks at the ridge before the fleet came. We slept in the concrete dome with the sidearm between us, and we ate what we had brought from the depot and what we could shoot, and we did not speak very much. There was nothing to say. We had both lost everything. We had both done the thing that was needed. There was no celebration in it. There was only the next breath and the next, and the slow gray awareness that we had been right, and that being right was the worst thing we could have been. The nights on the ridge were cold in a way Hallenbeck had never been. The dome held the day's heat for the first hour after sundown and then released it all at once, and after that we lay in our blankets and we listened to the wind work at the seams of the building, and the stars overhead were very hard and very many, and the orbital habitats made a thin band across the southern sky that I watched, on the bad nights, for hours. We rationed the water. We did not ration the food because the food would last and the water would not. Jens slept badly. He talked in his sleep sometimes in fragments in the intersystem accent he had been losing for 3 months, and most of what he said was the names of people I had never met. His mother, his father, a girl whose name I never asked about and who I assume now had been someone he knew at the school where they had taught him the old histories. I did not wake him. I let him have them. On the 2nd week, the clay came up the track again, 6 of them this time. They came on with the same unhurried walk and the same wide, soft smiles, and we did not let them up. Jens had the sidearm and I had a wrench from the van, and we had built a small barricade in the doorway from the panels of the collapsed dish. We held them off for an afternoon. They did not press. They did not understand pressing. They came at us in small waves of 2 and 3, and they smiled at us, and they asked us to come down, and we did not come down, and eventually they sat at the foot of the slope and they waited, because the clay was patient in a way no person had ever been patient, and they were content to wait until we ran out of water. We did not run out of water. The fleet came in on the afternoon of the 3rd week. We heard them before we saw them, a low thunder in the upper air, a sound that was not weather. Then the cruisers came down through the cloud, 3 of them, painted in the dark blue and white of the orbital service. And the foot of the slope where the clay had been waiting suddenly was not where the clay was any more. Because the cruisers had opened up with a weapon I had not seen before that took out the gathered clay and a quarter of the hillside with it, and the world went white for a moment. And when the world came back, the slope was bare, and Jens was holding my shoulder and saying my name, and I was crying without sound. A landing party came up the track. The officer in front of them was a tall woman in a hard suit with her helmet open, and she stopped 2 meters from us, and she looked at our faces for a long moment, the way a person looks at a piece of evidence, and she said, "Are you 2 of them?" Jen said, "No, ma'am." She said, "Prove it." Jen said, "I cannot prove it, but you can. You sent the warning. You sent it because of us. The clay does not send warnings. The clay wants you to stay where you are. We are the ones who wanted you to come. That is the only proof I can give you, and if it is not enough, you can shoot us where we stand, but you will know when you go down to the settlement which side we are on." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Get in the transport, both of you." They took us up to the cruiser. They put us in a small room with a medic and a sealed door, and they ran tests, and the tests were clean. We were us. The clay had not taken us. We were the only 2 who came out of Hallenbeck. The fleet went down to the settlement, and they did what had to be done, and I will not write about that part because I did not see it, and because Jens, who did see it, never told me what it had looked like from the cruiser when they went in. He told me only that there was nothing left to recover, and that we should not go down to the surface again. And I did not go down to the surface again, and I have not been back to Cygnus IV in 60 years. We were the first witnesses. The military took us inside their service because they did not know what else to do with us, and because the fleet captain, a man named Marsons, took a quiet liking to Jens and to his clean, careful intelligence. Jens went into intelligence. He worked the rest of the Salience War, what the news services called the Quiet War, in a room 3 decks below the surface of a station outside the belt, with a paper notebook and a pencil and a stack of after-action reports. He did the thing he had told me as a boy he had wanted to do. He kept the record. He wrote it all down. He was very good at it. He was the one who first identified the seeding vector, the agricultural enzyme containers, and he was the one who proposed the early screening protocol that was eventually adopted by every colony in the outer arm, and which, in the rough estimate of the eventual peace commission, saved somewhere between 40 and 60,000 lives. He did not live to see the end of the war. He died in a clearance operation on a small mining colony called Wettersham in the 11th year of the war, when he was 30 years old. He had insisted on going down to the surface because he wanted to confirm a hypothesis about how the parasite seeded itself into industrial settings, and he had gone down with a small team, and the team had been compromised, and Jens had not come back. I was told about it 3 days later in a corridor on the station outside the belt by a young lieutenant who did not know how to say it and tried 3 times. I told him to stop. I told him I had understood the first time. I went back to my bunk and I sat on the edge of it and I did not cry. I did not cry because I had cried the last time I would ever cry on the rock by the river with Jens chewing the stolen sausage, and I had not cried since, and I did not start again that day. I sat on the bunk and I thought about the wrapper in his pocket. I thought about the way he had said, "The boy is bringing the relay up." I thought about how he had not had to give me the day of my father's homecoming, and how he had given it to me anyway. I thought about all of it, and I sat on the bunk, and after a long time I got up and I went back to my post, because that was what he had done every day of the 11 years I had known him, and that was the thing he had taught me by example. I served another 14 years. I served on 3 different stations, and I rose to a rank I had not expected to rise to, and I retired with a small pension and a smaller flat in a hub colony 3 jumps from where I had grown up. I have lived in that flat for 31 years. I do not have a family. I did not marry. There was a woman twice, but neither of them stayed, and I do not blame them. There was a part of me that did not come back from the ridge, and it was not the kind of part that you could explain to a person who had not been there. I do not tell the story. I have not told it to anyone before tonight. The young man at the veteran's house who brings me my evening meal asks me sometimes about the war because he has seen the small ribbon on my jacket, and I tell him only that I served in the orbital service and that there was a lot of paperwork. He nods. He has a kind face. He is, I think, 23 years old, and he has no idea that the war happened, in any real sense, in a kitchen in Hallenbeck on a Tuesday morning, when a woman who had been my mother for 16 years smiled at me with the wrong smile. I want to set down one more thing. The pool. I told you I would come back to the pool. I will. The fleet, when they cleaned out Hallenbeck, did the settlement building by building, in a careful pattern, with a method that the histories describe in some detail. They started at the landing field and they worked north, then west, then south. The pool was the last building they went into, because it was the only building in the center of the settlement, and they wanted to know it was empty before they did what they were going to do. When they went in, they found Charlotte. She had not been at home. She had gone in the morning after I left to the pool, the way she had gone every morning of her life. The clay inside her had kept her routine because the clay kept all the routines. She had been in the water when the cruisers came down. They found her sitting at the edge of the pool with her feet in the warm water, with the wide, soft smile, waiting. She told the landing party that they should come into the water. She said the water was very nice. She said, "Would you like to be happy?" They shot her where she sat. The report does not say so in those words, but the report describes the action, and that is what happened. They shot her where she sat. She fell into the water and she made the pool unfit for use, which is the technical term the report uses, and the fleet drained the pool afterwards because the dome was the only structure they meant to preserve, and they preserved it, and I am told that the dome is still there on Cygnus IV, restored now, with a new pool in it, and that the children of the third settlement, which is called something else now, swim in it on summer afternoons. I have never gone back. I am told it is very pretty. I am told the chlorine still smells the same. I think about Charlotte often. I think about her at 6 when she taught me to swim. I think about her at 9 when she broke her wrist falling out of a tree and did not cry and told me with great gravity that she had decided not to. I think about her at 13, the last good year, when we sat on the rim of the pool with our feet in the water, and she told me that she wanted to be a doctor when she was older, and I told her I wanted to be a hauler captain, and we both knew that neither of those things would happen because we were children of a small colony at the edge of a long supply line, and we would do, like everyone else, whatever the colony needed us to do. I think about her at 16, in the warm water, smiling at me with the wrong smile. I think about her at 16, at the edge of the pool, smiling at the soldiers with the wrong smile. I think about her at the edge of the pool because that is where she went. She did not go because of the Parasite. She had gone there 1,000 times before. She went because that was where she had always gone, and the thing inside her did not know enough about her to choose anywhere else, and so it sat her down at the place she had loved, and it waited there with her face on, and when the soldiers came, she offered them the water. I think sometimes, when the night is long and my heart is doing the thing my doctor does not want me to think about, that the thing inside her, in its last moment, might have understood, just a little, that the offer was not enough, that the soldiers were not going to take the water, that it had misunderstood us, all the way through, from the first day in the rendering plant to the last day at the pool, that it had thought we wanted what it wanted, and that it had been wrong about us, and that the wrongness was going to cost it everything. I do not know whether that is true. I have no way to know. I am an old man and I am sentimental, and I want the thing inside Charlotte to have understood at the end that it had not understood us. I want it to have been sorry for a single second, in a way the clay was not built to be sorry. I want that very much. It is the closest thing I have to a faith. The doctor will be here in the morning with his small case and his quiet voice and his news about my heart. I will tell him I have slept well. I will tell him I feel better than I have in years. I will not be smiling when I say it.